Hey, look, I'm Marco Rubio. I'm Jon Caldara back. So Colorado needs to get into foreign affairs because that's what we do best. A bill introduced by a Republican has some Democratic support. Something is wrong in hell. Let's talk to Representative Jared Wright from House District 54 and Senator from House District 21, Jessie Ulibarri. How'd I do? Ulibarri.
Close,
That's close enough. All right, let's go over here first. Tell me what the problem is before you tell me what your solution is.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having us. I appreciate it, John. And I would describe the problem as this. It's a problem that has occurred in our own history in this country, and that is the indefinite detention without due process, without habeas corpus of our own citizens. A lot of people come to me and they say, well, you know, what's the problem you're trying to address here by pushing back against this federal law? And I tell them the problem is the same one that we saw in World War II. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed into law Executive Order 9066 back on February 19th, 1942, he gave the federal government the power to remove Japanese Americans, and these are American citizens, but of Japanese descent, from the Pacific Seaboard and relocate them, taking them away from their ways of life, their homes, their jobs, and placing them in internment camps.
Yeah, but they weren't Italians, so it really wasn't a bad problem.
Okay, I'll concede
go with that one.
I'll concede
All right,
that.
but that was way back then. You know, there's no way that, given the information age we have now, that a president could order a large group of people based on their race into some sort of relocation camp during a war. I mean, I just can't see that happening. Is it a problem today?
Well, you know, while it might not be that to that extent where we're looking at an entire race being taken and interned, I would agree with you there. We're fighting a different war today. The war that we're fighting today, the war on terror, we have an ambiguous enemy, and our enemy is located within our own country. So as we're fighting a very different war, I think it's important that we reinforce the fact that if you are a citizen of this country, regardless of what you're accused of, you have the same rights as your neighbor. And those rights are to having a speedy trial, having access to counsel, making sure that you have all of the rights of due process.
Jessie, tell me why this is a state issue. I mean, even if I'm sympathetic with the idea of that government shouldn't detain people without due process, it's not like the state of Colorado or any of her municipalities does that on any regular basis. It doesn't happen in this state. Why is this a state issue?
So I think we have to consider the issue in the full context in which we're considering the bill. And as Representative Wright outlined the historical significance of this, he and I, we were joking before we got started about our age. But most of our adult life has been held in the context of the war on terror. We've been at war now for almost, 12 years. And we've seen the damaging effects and the damning effects of that on our local communities. We see our friends and our colleagues head off to war. We also see the threats that maybe a generation behind us has no ability to see, which is that we remember the world as young adults before the war on terror, where you could go to an airport without being accosted by a TSA agent, where you could enjoy some level of privacy pre-Facebook, pre-Google, all of those things. And so we have an inkling of what the world looked like before the war on terror, and then we've seen the world change fundamentally in 12 years. And so as we think about this bill and many others and the role the state has to play, I think there's a bigger issue at play, which is that we've seen the erosion of some of our constitutional rights and protections in the name of public safety and the war on terror. And so I think on the heels of a memo that we just got from the administration saying that the government can and should kill a U.S. citizen that is suspected of terrorism without going through any kind of trial or procedure, that's concerning to us to say, you know, this isn't the 50s, it's not the 40s, it's, you know, let's go back and back and back. Well, we're taking it in the context of today, which is that there has been an erosion of our basic civil rights and civil liberties as it relates to this issue and many others in the name of the war on terror. So how is this a state issue? Here in Colorado, we have multiple entities that are controlled by the federal government. One could be the Supermax facility. The other one is the Fusion Center that we have in Colorado.
The Fusion Center?
Yes.
It's a jazz place.
Not a
It's a
jazz
bar.
place. No, it's not a fun place to hear good beats.
What is a fusion center?
It's a place that amalgamates data that's collected from various federal entities. So Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, Homeland Security, sometimes getting information from local law enforcement, and essentially building a data record of nearly every single person in the state of Colorado. So there are these entities that are federally controlled in the state of Colorado, and there may be an instance where a state actor, a local law enforcement agent, would be required or asked to participate in the indefinite detention of an American citizen. I fundamentally reject the idea that we would indefinitely detain an American citizen without due process. And so by offering this bill, we're imagining a scenario that could exist based on the circumstances that we know that have happened historically, but also the cues we've seen as we move forward as a society towards fewer liberties and more oversight as it comes to public safety.
I get this from the senator. He used to be an ACLU guy. That's where he had his job, and he's a Democrat from the Denver area. I get it. You're a Republican, all right? You're one of the brothers, all right? There's no problem. There's no problem holding people against without due process or without a trial, because those are bad guys, and those bad guys are better off taken away and put someplace. What's wrong with you?
You know, this is the modern Republican Party, and as we go through some very significant, as you know, John, growing pains, I think you're going to start seeing people like myself that want leadership positions that are saying, look, while there are very bad people out there, there's no question, there are certainly terrorists out there that want to cause untold damage to our society. The argument here is the slippery slope, against the slippery slope of losing our fundamental civil liberties as American citizens. And there's a balance. There has to be a balance. And they talked about this during World War II. The war frenzy that took place then, the mass of public opinion was that all of these Americans should have been rounded up and should have been placed in internment camps. That's why the Supreme Court upheld it. It was upheld in Korematsu. And I would like to add to what the senator just said in that the agent that arrested Mr. Korematsu in Los Angeles, the story of Fred Korematsu is very compelling. This is a man that changed. He had plastic surgery in 1942, if we can imagine how crude that surgery was, on his eyelids to try to look like a Caucasian so he wouldn't be arrested. He ended up being arrested on a street corner by local law enforcement. It wasn't by the military, it was by local law enforcement.
All right, let's bring it to that. This bill then is all about Colorado. You're not petitioning the government of the United States to do anything. This says in Colorado something's going to change. Explain that change in a way that I can understand. What's the bill number? What does it do?
It's House Bill 1045, and what the bill says is that state actors should not comply with the indefinite detention of...
Should not or can't?
Cannot comply with the indefinite detention of a U.S. citizen. And I think it's important to note that we're not implying that these are good people or bad people, but rather that we have a justice system that we should have faith in to do the right thing. So if this is a bad person, have them go through the process of law and make that finding and make your case. And at the end of that case, hopefully we have someone, if they committed a crime or is a threat to our safety, prove it. That's why we have a justice system. But in the course of this, we shouldn't be honoring that section of the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1021, that says we can indefinitely detain someone based on previous court law, which includes the internment of Japanese Americans. What we're saying is you cannot comply if it is a basic violation of our Constitution.
Well, let me ask how this works in practice, though. So you're saying that, let's say a guy's being held without a trial, and they're transferring him to Supermax here in Colorado, that a local cop can't be the escort, can't be the one that picks him up, drives him, and delivers him down to Supermax. You cannot help the federal government in their goal of keeping this guy indefinitely detained. Is that basically how it works?
Correct. Now, your initial premise was that he was appearing in some form of a trial. I'm assuming that trial would be a military tribunal. Right. And absolutely, this would only apply. The local law enforcement would only be able to participate if he, in fact, was going to a domestic trial, not a military one.
is this symbolic or is this real? In other words, how do you know that the guy that the local enforcement gets the APP on this guy, ABP, whatever it is, all points bulletin, and catches him? They don't know if this guy's going to be detained indefinitely, or if they're asked to transport him down and the Denver sheriff is there. You don't know if it's going to Supermax to be detained forever. How in the world would a local cop or a local official know these things?
So I think it's important to know, again, the context in which we're operating. Part of, I think, the way that the war on terror has worked so well to come in underneath our constitutional rights and liberties is to say you don't talk about it, right? So part of this is to have the conversation, not just symbolically, but to have the conversation in the public eye and say, if you're the cop that's transporting someone to Supermax and you're prohibited from doing it under state law if this person will be detained indefinitely without being charged of any crime, let's have a question. Let's raise the question. Let's ask the question. Because what we've seen is that we've been told, don't ask any questions. This is in the best interest of public safety. At the same time, we've seen some of our constitutional rights and liberties eroded because we're not asking those essential questions.
And I would add, John, I was a police officer for 6 years prior to running for office, and
You're 12. How is that possible?
I was an 8-year-old police officer, but we got these APBs on a regular basis, whether they were from the Department of Homeland Security or they were from the FBI, that dealt with individuals that were wanted and possibly on terrorist watch lists. Even in the small town of Fruita, we got some of these APBs. Local law enforcement, even the most rural agencies, are very good about doing their due diligence. And one area that we were good with dealing with state law was Senate Bill 90. You may remember dealing with immigrants. So we know how to watch for these things. And I think that once this state law is passed, we'll see local law enforcement
This is not just
comply.
symbolic.
No.
This is not just a message, but it's going to have some real world impact. What's interesting to me is that Democrats are now using a lot of that 10th Amendment arguments that we Republicans use all the time, not only in this, but also as medical marijuana, or excuse me, recreational marijuana is there. We've got Democrats screaming about 10th Amendment rights. Oh, those states. Am I off on that?
I would say that there might be some divergent views within the party on that issue specifically.
Well, it's about time. That I like. Is this thing going to pass?
Yes, I believe we have the votes to get it out of our first committee, and we should get it passed through the House. So.
Jared, thank you. Jesse, thank you. And thank you. Listen for me on KHOW Radio. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute, and we'll see you next week.